I was writing a tune, and the words "You're a Dying Machine" came out, and the concept for that song kind of came together. And then after that, I was like, I love the feeling of this song and where it's going, so why not try to do it again with another song and try to keep telling the story. And then 4 songs deep, I'm like, all right, it's 4 songs deep, let's just go the whole way and make the whole thing a concept record. I'm not a fan of concept records. I mean, there's been
Oh.
great ones, but it's never been something where it's I grew up listening to this concept record I want to do, and it just kind of fell in my lap, and just chased it down. So this 20 minutes before I go on stage, I came up with this idea of a man who creates this being to be his, to love him unconditionally. This is in the future, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But she's conditioned to love him, but she doesn't know when to turn it off. So he gets tired of the situation, but she's relentless about it, and in the end, she chases him down and kills him strictly out of passion. But that kind of sounds like that's kind of the story in a nutshell, but it's much more fleshed out and much less scientific. And Bringer of War, like you said, is the big, mean, aggressive vessel character who wants to destroy mankind. And he's actually called the Bringer of War towards the end of the book, but he wears that as a badge of honor. He stands behind it. I am the Bringer of War, and I'm going to bring an end to mankind. And we are the new superior human race, these vessels that they've created. So it's got to read the book. I wanted to come from different points of view. Each song comes from a different personality in the story. So, I tell people I've never in my career written a love song, a song about lost love or anything like that. But on this record, I did, because you can sing from another point of view and get away with something like that. So the first to last is kind of that song. As the Silence Becomes Me is from a whole nother point of view in the story. Bringer of War is obviously from the main, the big vicious vessel character. There's Throw Them to the Lions, same perspective. Make It Hurt, same point of view. But the record covers, like I said, many different points of view and perspectives. So it kind of goes on this dynamic journey.
If I were to describe Tremonti's first 3 albums in one word, it would be consistency. Each of those albums is a pretty solid listen from start to finish. There's nothing really bad on any of those albums. On the flip side of that, there's nothing particularly memorable or great either. They're just solid modern rock albums. Of course, part of that could be me trying to listen to all 3 albums and get to know them all at the same time. That would be kind of tough. I didn't discover Tremonti's solo stuff until 2017. At that time, all 3 albums were out, and I was trying to listen to them all at the same time. And while I find them solid albums, I just couldn't really remember a whole lot of the tracks. With Tremonti's 2018 album, A Dying Machine, that's a bit of a different story. The first 3 albums didn't really have a whole lot of peaks and valleys. The best songs weren't really that much better than the worst songs on those albums. I definitely feel more of a connection with the songs that stand out to me on this album than on the previous ones. They just seem a lot more memorable to me. The production on this album is solid, as you would expect. It sounds like any other Tremonti album in terms of guitar tone, drums, vocals, anything like that. Everything sounds good. The drummer and bassist both do their jobs just fine, and Tremonti is a beast on the guitar. He has some really good riffs on this album. That goes for both the heavy riffs and the melodic riffs. My biggest complaint about the guitar work on this album is the lack of solos. There are several tracks that don't have solos, and quite a few songs where they'll have a little solo at the very end of the track. I typically like the solos to be in the middle of the song, where they traditionally are, to break up the song a little bit, give you a break from the vocals, and allow you to hear something instrumental for a little bit. I bitched about this a lot on the last review I did. His solos also don't have a whole lot of diversity to them. They're not bad, but I think he could do better. I never appreciated Mark's guitar ability until I heard him in Alter Bridge. When I heard he could actually play, he never showed off his talents in Creed at all. So I thought with his solo stuff he'd show off a lot more, do a lot more guitar solos, do a lot more interesting things musically, and he hasn't really done that. Vocally, his melodies are a lot more memorable on here. I feel like he's really growing as a vocalist. It feels like there's a lot more diversity on this album, too. It feels like he tries to do a few different things to keep the album from becoming monotonous. While I do feel more of a connection with my favorite songs on this album, my biggest complaint about this one is I feel like there are way too many filler tracks. This album is bogged down with them big time. Out of the 13 actual songs on this album, I find 6 of them to be filler, which really drags the album down. I think this thing would have been much better served if there had only been 10 or 11 tracks rather than 14, and the instrumental at the end serves no purpose whatsoever. There are also way too many acoustic tracks for my liking. I think there's something like 4 or 5 of them on here, which drags the album down too, especially considering I only like one of them. Another thing I do like about this album, like all his previous work, it definitely feels like there's heart behind this music. It feels like Mark is doing music that he loves making, and it feels like he puts his heart and soul into it. And as a listener, I really appreciate that aspect of his music. The album opens with the song Bringer of War. The intro to this song has kind of a marching drum beat kind of sound to the drums. It reminds me a lot of something that I've heard on a movie before. There's a song that I think is actually a real song, but I can't remember what it's called. I feel like it was in a Quentin Tarantino movie, but I'm not a movie guy, so don't quote me on that. Maybe Pulp Fiction. That's one of the few movies of his I've actually seen, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Once the song gets going, it's a heavier, fast paced track. This is one of my favorite songs on the album. I think it's a great way to start the album off. It's got that cool intro, it's got a nice fast pace to it. As the verses go along, it ends up building towards the chorus, so there's a nice change there, still keeping that speed going. The chorus is slower paced, but still flows really well with the song. There's a decent enough guitar solo in there as well. Overall, just a really good song and a good way to start the album off. From the Sky is next, and this is one of a few songs on here that have a fast paced, heavy first verse and then a heavy but slower paced second verse. It's an okay track, but it doesn't really go anywhere. There's not a good chorus to kind of bring that song together or a good guitar riff or something to kind of replace that chorus. What I mean by that is if you think of a lot of Black Sabbath songs, don't have choruses, but they have a distinct guitar riff that kind of serves that purpose and kind of works, and this song has neither. The title track, Dying Machine, is next. This is a slower paced, heavier song. I like the verses a lot. It has this melodic section which builds towards the actual chorus, I guess. When I was listening to this track, I was thinking that that softer part was the chorus. This song kind of feels like it drags out a little bit. I like songs to be longer, but this one just doesn't really have a good flow to it for me. Trust is the next track, and this is the first of the softer tracks on the album. Unlike the rest of them, this one's not an acoustic track, though. It starts off with some effects and then goes into its verse, which is fairly up-tempo in terms of the drumming. The guitars are softer. This song reminds me a lot of the pacing of the Creed song Overcome. It's an alright track, but it doesn't really do a whole lot for me either. He does try something different with his vocals at the end, which is kind of cool. Almost Miles Kennedy-esque, but not quite. Throw Them to the Lions is next. I like this track. It's a slower paced, heavier track. Well, the first verse is faster, the second verse is a little bit slower. It's another one of those songs that does that bit. It's got a decent chorus, overall a decent song. The solo is way too short though. They really should have expanded on that, and it wasn't really very remarkable at all. Make It Hurt is one of my favorite tracks on the album. It's got a nice, slow-paced, heavy intro that leads into a heavier, up-tempo verse. Once the verse gets done, they go back into that slow intro to kind of build towards a faster-paced chorus. Overall, the vocals are really well done on here. I really like this track a lot. It's got a cool bridge to it. It's one of those tracks that I talked about before where they do the solo at the end of the song rather than in the middle of it, and I don't really care for that. I think it would have been cool if they did a solo in the middle of the song and then did one again at the end. Traipse is next. This one has a lot of acoustic moments. It doesn't really do a whole lot for me, though. It might have the longest solo on the album, and it's an okay solo, but the song itself just never really grabbed my attention. The First, The Last is next, and it's another acoustic track. This one sounds very bright and kind of poppy, very catchy. The lyrics are kind of cheesy, but you know what? I really love this track. The last album I reviewed, I complained about the album being very poppy. This song definitely has that poppy feel to it, but the difference here is this song feels like it has heart to it. I really like the vocals on this track a lot. I just wish that Trapes and The First to Last had been separated by a heavier track. I don't really like those two being back to back like that. A Lot Like Sin is probably my favorite song on the album. There's a bit of a personal connection to that song and what it makes me think of, but I'm not going to go there. Granted, nobody I know listens to these reviews anyway, so it probably wouldn't be a huge deal, but still. I really like the opening guitar riff. It definitely has some attitude. That continues throughout the verses. I really like the verses a lot. My favorite part of this track is the build towards the chorus. A melodic guitar comes in. It still keeps the attitude, but it's just more melodic. And the vocals change up too. It's a really good build towards the chorus, and the chorus doesn't disappoint either. Overall, it's just a good song. Again, the solo doesn't come in until the end of the song, though, which is kind of annoying because you're going to hear me say it again, but I really want that solo in the middle of the song to break things up. The Day When Legions Burn is another heavier, faster paced song. I don't really have a whole lot to say about this track, honestly. I really like it. It's good. It's a solid hard rock song. There's not really a whole lot to say about it. As the Silence Becomes Me is another acoustic track mostly. I'll Take You With Me reminds me of Tremonti doing a song in that kind of Blink 182 pop punk style. And I don't mean that as an insult to this song. He does it really well. He does this style a whole lot better than the bands that actually do that style for a living. It's a really cool song and offers a completely different mood for the album, and I really like that. It's a lot more bright and up tempo, yet still being a heavier track. Desolation is pretty much the last song on the album. It's mostly acoustic. There are some heavier parts mixed in. This song doesn't really seem to do much for me. It's got a good sound to it. It definitely sounds like one of those songs that's not doing the verse chorus format, which I can certainly appreciate. In spite of the complaints that I have, this is still a solid album. There are 7 songs that I really, really like, and the other songs aren't necessarily bad by any means. If you haven't heard this album yet, there's a chance you might like some of those other songs that I don't care for. I really want to give this album a higher rating because of the number of songs that I like a lot, but with all the filler tracks, I really can't help but give this album a 7 out of 10. It's good, it's definitely worth your time, but it really could be better, especially if they had trimmed a few of the filler tracks and expanded on some of the tracks that were still left. Add some longer and more impressive guitar solos or something like that. Still, it's a worthy addition to Tremonti's discography and definitely one you should pick up, and my second favorite album of the year.